Like most people are probably getting really average results. So if you try and be like everyone else, actually the best you could probably do is...
Hello and welcome to Get a Shift On, your podcast all about career change and showing that it really is possible to start something and make a change. Today, I'm really pleased to welcome for the second time, Ben Walton. We met last year and Ben came and did a great episode and we talked all about his businesses and what he's doing now. But we ran out of time, so we wanted to come back and start again. Ben and I have a connection in that we both went to the same boarding school up in Surrey, albeit a few years apart, but we have shared lots of amusing stories about that time. Ben, welcome back to the podcast.
And also apologies for last time. I waffled on so much. We've had to make it a two-parter. Whilst I feel honoured, I think it's also a reflection of how much I waffled on. So basically,
Not at all.
2 coffees in front of me and a glass of water. Strap yourselves in. We're going again.
Excellent. My schedule is clear till 2:00. We're on. We're on.
Cancelled lunch.
Ben, for those that weren't here last time, can you please just share with us who you are, what you do, and how you spend your days?
I think a lot of people ask that question of how I spend my days, including my wife. But, I think, well, I do a few things, and what I would say is, I've really sort of gone to embrace this idea of this portfolio career, which is, my kind of way. But so I guess none of the things I do work on their own, but you sort of all add them together and then hopefully they do work. So, but a quick potted history would be, I used to work in like online, I guess gaming, gambling really. And then I always harbored this dream of like having my own restaurant. But also by that stage, I wanted a bit more kind of like meaningful stuff. It was always online. So it'd be quite nice to have like, bricks and mortar and people actually coming in and but still having that same kind of like, online gives you that instant gratification, but then a restaurant would give you a instant gratification because you can see people, consume something, but also you might be like, let's put this on the menu and you can see it either, absolutely fly or to your horror, very unpopular. You think, what? Why not a kimchi burger? Anyway, so I then started some restaurants and did that for like 9 years. And then, the dream, the love of it turned into sort of a bit of a nightmare at the end, which is a fairly well-trodden path. So then I went back to having to work. I was working before, I'd like to think, but, having to work for other people. And I did that for like, I don't know, let's say 3 years. And then about 2 years ago, I did something actually I never felt comfortable with, which was to go freelance. A couple of people have sort of asked and I'd sort of just done a little bit on the side just to sort of see how it felt. And I think that is a good way of doing anything actually, rather than like, you've got to quit something. You can start it as a side thing. And it started to feel all right. And I guess also maybe because we've evolved into our time, but I always thought being like a consultant was like super slick decks and impressive talks to people. It's not really my bag. Like I'm happy in this situation, but I'm quite shy. Speaking in public, wouldn't be very keen on it. I cannot do a good looking deck to save my life. They're awful. It's basically words on a PowerPoint. It may as well be a Word doc. So I can't do pretty decks. And so I thought, well, I can't be a consultant, but actually, like lots of things, just change it. But I do feel as well, like maybe the world's moved on and you can be much more authentically you, to use some of our modern, parlance, if you like. And so now I've really sort of embraced that. So I, initially I was just a freelance and I turned it into like an actual proper business because I was like, right, I'm really going to commit. And I felt like having a name for it would help me do that and help focus me even more. So I do something called On a Plate Growth, and I help sort of like food, drink and hospitality businesses, and sort of really help them, not so much on the strategy side, but much more about the sort of mostly small wins and things that you can do to make a difference, try and move the needle like on a regular basis rather than necessarily the big ticket stuff. But again, they all kind of add up and make that difference. So lots of the small wins, but a lot around like email marketing because people generally quite bad at that or quite stuck in it, don't know what to write. So that was like the big problem that I wanted to help solve because I'm lucky enough to find that relatively easy in terms of the content. And then also I like the sort of thing of like, we'll set a reminder, automated email on that day. We'll send the campaign on this day. And again, it's that kind of like bit of an action junkie. I love the buzz of like the email goes out, the offer gets taken up, you sell a whole bunch of units. that always feels like a fun thing to do. So a lot of email marketing, some Shopify optimization, and that sort of morphed as well as you sort of talk to clients. So I'll help them with like customer surveys, and now also sort of building communities. And then on the community front, with my friend Lizzie, we've started something called Best Before. We're in Brighton, and weirdly, it makes no sense. There were no kind of like networking events for sort of food, drink, and hospo folk, which, really odd. And so you have to go to London. But I also just assumed I was kind of like missing out. Like there was some secret thing and I just was, wasn't in. And then you're like, actually, there isn't. I was talking to Lizzie and she was like, there isn't. And then we were like, well, why maybe we should do our own. And Lizzie's great at events and she runs a whole bunch, including she started the Brighton Natural Wine Fair, which is now called Poor Choices. And they've started doing some bits and pieces in London. But anyway, so she's great at that. So I was like, well, I know someone who's great at events. And then between us, we know quite a few people. So we're like, why don't we start doing that? So we started our own little events thing to bring people. And neither of us love networking. So it's kind of like, how do you make networking, if you don't like it, it's quite a good starting point. Like, how do you make it more bearable? So for us, it was like, we get really interesting speakers in, we get great food and drink, but, not all the classic things or like the beige buffet. We'll go and find like the cool sandwich shop in town, ask them to, make some sandwiches for it, that kind of thing. We'll invite some amazing drinks brands down, so hopefully you go there and think this is great. On the very first one, we had like a little mini, truck's the wrong word, but a little chai cart almost. So as people came in, they had like hot steaming chai and that really set the tone. And now we always have like a welcome drink from someone. So, just these little things where you feel like, oh, that's not so bad. On like the name tags, we don't put like your surname or your job. We just have your first name. So it kind of like means that everyone's kind of equal and you're more like, because I think if you see someone and go, oh, shit, they're the CEO of thing, I won't talk to them. But if they're just like David, you think, well, I may as well have a chat with them. I'm sitting next to him, so you don't have that same thing. So it's breaking down those barriers. And I think therefore you're more like to have more good conversations. So doing all that, I also run like a little online community called the Growth Collective, which again is for people in food and drink. And that's much more about sharing growth tips, so like this email will get you a 3% click-through rate, much more that kind of thing. And then the other thing I've just started, we put it live yesterday. So it really is. It's called Side Project. And a little, in the spirit of this, I guess, it's for people who want to start something on the side, but either, forgot they could or need the inspiration they could. It's kind of like mostly based on Substack. So the one idea being like, oh, I really want to write on Substack, but I have got no audience and it takes a long time to build up an audience. The idea being that you can publish on this central, so it's got everyone's aggregated all their followers together and then you're posting to an audience. So it feels more validating from day one because you might be like, when you come around to post, it might be like, oh, there's 500 people. That's much more meaningful than you going, I've got this to say, but I've only saying it to my mum,
I was going to say, mum's always the first one on the list, right?
Yeah, exactly. Although I think she hasn't subscribed to Side Project yet. I'll be WhatsApping her the link later.
Dreadful.
Yeah, it's outrageous, baby. Although I'm not sure she's got the Substack app yet, but that'll be, we'll have to go through that battle.
All in good time.
But yeah, so that's the thing. So hopefully, and that's for once not in food and drink. That's just broader. And so it just means we can have more conversation with more people. But we're also going to do like events to help people unlock their creativity. Or it might be, we might do a little event where it's about a writing course, for example, and help people get started on that. So all these little bits, and it's quite a nice umbrella of, side projects and really for lots of frustrated artists. And there's a thing in I think Brighton recently got, I'm doing this with my friend Rose, who's brilliant. And she wrote a post yesterday that Brighton is seen as the most creative city, but actually not everyone in it is that creative. Not because they were attracted to this creative place, but life gets in the way. So it's trying to sort of, unblock a bit and get people to unleash their creativity, which is for a lot of people why they moved to Brighton. Hopefully we'll tap into that.
Yeah.
That was like a really good thing. And I say we put it live last night. We've already had some lovely comments about yes. So anyway, a long-winded way of saying that's me and what I'm up to, really.
No, fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that. Before we go anywhere else, let's get some links to your projects, and we'll put those in the description so people can, follow along and see what you're doing. Well, where do we start with that? Actually, I want to go right back to the restaurants very briefly. And I want to touch on two things. One, not so serious, and one slightly more serious. You talked about putting things on the menu and seeing that instant gratification or not. I would love to know, what is the best thing you ever put on the menu that really did get that amazing, wow, this is brilliant. But moreover, what was the one thing you put on that people just were like, no, that should never be
Well,
on a
actually,
menu
the
anywhere?
no one quickly is the kimchi burger. I put it on. I was ahead of my time, so I sort of, and also we had he was a cookbook writer, um, with I think a Korean mum, and so he was always advocating to me kimchi, and I love him to bits. And he's actually absolutely, he's so good and such a genius, and always like suggesting delicious things. And so I think he really got me into this idea of kimchi, and he helped us put a kimchi burger on the menu. But we were a good 2 or 3 years before, especially Southwest London was ready for
Yeah,
kimchi. So
yeah.
ironically, by the time we'd come around to closing the restaurants, we were actually selling kimchi as a side, and people were having a side of kimchi with their smashed avocado. But when we put this bloody kimchi burger on, no, but I was like, still, I think I was the only one who's ever ordering it. It was delicious, and no amount of like owner propaganda could persuade
Yeah.
people. So that was a surprising flop, despite, my authentic story. It was, people
Yeah,
weren't
yeah.
having any of it. They were like, whatever, I don't trust you, mate. um, and then conversely, one which absolutely flew. I got a few lucky hits on my, I think I was better at brunch. In fact, I was better at brunch. I can nail a brunch menu, not so good at dinner, it seems. But we did fried chicken Benny. So it was like fried chicken, poached eggs, and hollandaise. And people were like, I don't know, are you sure? Absolutely flew. People loved it. So that was a real winner. And then prior to that, my other, in the same vein, I think I called it eggs pig out, and it was pulled pork, poached eggs, hollandaise. Um, and again, massive. But now it just feels like they're fairly normal dishes. But back then, it's a long time ago. Back then, they were kind of like that was that maybe didn't have to break so much ground, but that was pretty groundbreaking. And it was really new, and people weren't really doing that kind of thing. And so they really sort of hit through. And I guess it was always for me this sort of tension. I always felt like actually Southwest London, not a particularly exciting, not adventurous bunch particularly, but I always wanted to push because that's much more interesting to me to be like, right, what can you have? So there's tension between like, hey, I'm going to force this upon you, and then potentially like, oh, thank you, or you've really got this wrong. And that and trying to get that, but I guess I'd sacrifice some surefire things instead of like trying to be different to everyone else. And I think there might be a theme that we get to throughout this whole conversation, and it's something I really started embracing at the end of last year and have really tried to continue into this year, which is being different. And this idea of like, most people are probably getting really average results. So if you try and be like everyone else, actually the best you could probably do is get average results, but actually you'll probably get worse than that because you're just copying someone else. It's not coming from your heart. You haven't got the same passion or for it. So I feel like that's another thing. And I guess that's, and maybe I suppress some of that in the sort of like knocking of confidence of restaurants closing. And maybe that's reawoken a little bit with the confidence as it sort of seeps back into me over the last sort of 6 months or so, and being bolder around like, actually I don't want to be like everyone else per se. I'm sure I do lots of things like everyone else, but you know what I mean, like where I can just try and be that little bit different or do things slightly unusually.
I think that you make a really interesting point there, actually, and I do want to pick it up because when you were talking, you talked about being authentic, and actually being different. I think is absolutely key to that. We see so many people. You and I know both share LinkedIn, um, and it's so hard sometimes to see the wood through the trees, as it were, to see that constant barrage of you should be doing this, you should be doing that, try this, try that. And people do just follow, and it's mediocre at best, actually. To stand out and be you, I think, is a much better way of doing it. We talked about the restaurants and the failure of the restaurants. We talked about that first time round as well. Just can you touch on that again? And obviously I know things didn't quite go to plan. So how did you pick yourself up and manage to move on from what felt like such a hard blow at the time?
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely was a hard blow, and then little did we know on the horizon was COVID. But actually, so a blessing of it would be it was always tough, really stressful, and then I had young kids, and I think adding in navigating through COVID in that environment would have been like, and I just moved down to Brighton, so it would have been like I'm commuting up. but I can't commute. Like that would have been like an extra, a level of headache that I'm not sure how I would have gone through that one. So even though it was like the worst possible thing, like it was absolutely my nightmare. Like I never wanted for it to go wrong. Like, my money, family money, friends and family money, and then eventually even like, third parties who were kind of, because we did a crowdfund. That's a lot of disappointed stakeholders along the way. And literal nightmare, so, and I guess I watched it was like a slow death over about 2.5 years, where it's like, oh, that's not going so well, well, I will try that. And because along that way we'd always found a way through it, we'd like, I don't know, maybe we'd put fried chicken with poached eggs and they'd gone crazy. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
We'd always found a way. So people were like, you'll find a way, and I was like, yeah, I will find a way. I've always managed it. But then eventually, like, well, I am running out of magic tricks here, like I have done a lot. And actually then probably you go through this then stage of like trying way too many things, but then going the other way and going, I'm trying nothing, then going, I'm going to try loads of things again. And so probably from a customer point of view, like, whoa, what's going on? Staff would be like, I have no idea anymore what this guy's on. And even maybe yourself, and I think maybe you lose sense of that magic. And also along the way, because we did crowdfund, and the idea was then to really accelerate the growth. But within that, I think change mindset of trying to then be, at the time, everyone was rolling out concepts, and then you'd get to 10, you'd probably, take some more money, and then you'd sell out, you'd exit. So it was quite a clear path, and that was the path I wanted to go down. Whereas now I wouldn't have that mentality. And actually there's probably an argument that model isn't working very well for many people anymore anyway. But I would try and keep the authenticity of, like more soul in it, rather than probably consciously stripping out some of the soul, with this idea that it had to be repeatable and we're going to have 10 of these things. You see what I mean? And like making decisions on that basis, rather than making decisions of like, this is just the loveliest hangout place, even though there's always going to be some of that. But I think we probably lost sight of some of that along the way. But yeah, and then so in terms of like navigating it, it was bloody awful. But I think actually having young kids meant there's no way around it, right? I may have wanted to wallow, but there's no wallow, no real time to wallow. Well, you could do, but I think, it's kind of like that sense of commitment, that you've got to go and find your way, and you can't be too down. And actually, so then I was like, right, I want to go back into marketing. So I don't want to work in hospitality. I definitely feel too scarred from that. But I'd love to stay in food and drink, because that's, much more passionate and much easier to talk about. And also I'd spent like 9 years working with like finding amazing producers, doing collabs, pop-ups, all this kind of stuff. So it felt really weird to turn my back on that, and go back towards probably a bit more online gaming side. So I wanted to stay food and drink. But I meant I had to take a job like, way lower, and then work my way slowly back up. And that was quite a weird a weird thing to do. And from when I first started in an office, being the youngest and thinking people who were like 26 were like ancient, to being officially the most ancient person in the building by quite some way, like probably 10 years old. And then when you're older than the founders, you're like, oh god, you know uh, and having to suppress quite a bit, because you're like, well, hang on, I've been a founder, and now I'm sort of, not I can't take direction, but it's a different sort of thing, right? And so having to suck up some of that, but being aware that there's a different purpose. It's like, well, I've got kids, got to sort this out, got mortgage, all that kind of jazz. So helpful, but no doubt, sort of stressful, and maybe you could argue, I don't know, maybe like it takes you longer to work through some of the sort of like horror of it, because you never have a real kind of like down moment of really like, oh god, that was horrendous. You sort of never really got to stop. It was just kind of like, right, we've got to get the show back on the road. So good and bad, right? But I think it's having that's where having those commitments can be beneficial.
I agree completely. I think there is nothing, there is no more of a driver than family, children, a mortgage, rent, the bills that come flooding in, regardless of what's happening in your business. And you have to find a way. And I think I see that with a lot of my clients who are looking to leave or change. And you talked about side hustles and doing something on the side. I want to come back to that in a minute. But I think when you have that driver, you have to do something, and you can't wallow. If you're having a crappy time at work, then that's one thing. Do something about it. And like I say, there is a driver that pushes you to go on and make decisions. And yes, actually, if that means being the oldest person in the office with the least experience there, then actually, do you know what? Sometimes you have to suck that up and move with it and learn from it. And actually, at some point, I think when you build yourself back up, you look back on those experiences with probably a fondness, really. It was hard at the time, but there is something about it. And of course, you are where you are now with all of these amazing things going on. You must have learned so much about yourself and the way that businesses actually work in that time.
Yeah, I think you do learn, and also it's this thing, isn't it, of like what you're doing now doesn't need to be what you're doing next. It doesn't need to be like defining chapter. And again, that's like that realization. And even though living through it is quite long, like I remember commuting up to London for another job, you know, like 3, 4, sometimes even every day of the week. Sometimes I try not to do that too often. But you know, then it's like 2 hours door to door, so like 4 hours of your day commuting, and then back to like no sleep, kids, blah blah blah. You know, like it, you know, I did not enjoy that, but it was also like, you know, you can put it into, you can rationalize it. And then also like, how hard is it really? Like, if you really boil it down, it's like, okay, you got to get up, you got to go and sit on a train for a couple of hours, punch in, you know, you're going to have some coffee, you're going to have some chats, you're going to have a nice sandwich. It's not that bad. Some of it's ego, right? And you're like, okay, just fuck it up, you know, and so you can do it as long as you got a reason why. And I guess I probably always knew, you know, this idea that it wasn't going to be forever. Do you know what I mean? Like I would find a way. Didn't know what it was, and actually, as I say, I didn't expect to go freelance, and I definitely was very aware that I didn't have the confidence to start another business because I was too bruised and battered from you know, my one imploding, if you like. But yeah, well, actually, also you have just reminded me. I forgot to plug my other business. So I have a Bloody Mary business, which came out of the don't know why I forgot that, because that takes up quite a lot of my time. It came out of the ashes of the restaurant. So we have Bloody Ben's Bloody Mary mix. But actually, that side hustle, and this is probably the theme of what we were just saying, actually, so it does all make sense. That side hustle gave me a lot of ways to feel better about it. And I was working for someone else doing what I didn't necessarily want to do, but I also had this other thing on the side, which allowed me to have autonomy, have creativity, go and meet new people, strike new deals. And also probably that sense of like, well, if I just did a mega deal, then that's my ticket out of here, baby. You see what I mean? And actually, again, like, so now it's still not as big as we'd like it to be, but it's a bit bigger. And but those opening of doors would have been part of the thing that allowed me to then become a consultant, I think, because actually I'd probably met even more people because I was like doing collaboration pop-ups and so on. So yeah, I would have been into the orbit of more people, which have now allowed for this world to exist.
It's really interesting because you touched on something that I think is so important for people there, and that's purpose and having something to work towards and for. That goes beyond the necessity of providing for one's family, but that purpose of actually, this is what I'm doing, this is what I really enjoy. I will suck up the bad bit on the side. If I have to commute into London, if I have to go and work for some young startup who thinks they know everything, then actually driving my own thing on the side keeps me going. And again, something I talk to my clients about, because I think it's so important that people understand, once you have that direction and purpose that you can go towards, everything else just works. Because you just get on with it. You just find a way, because yeah, it's like, okay, I'm going to work, that pays the bills, but my side hustle, whatever that happens to be, Bloody Mary mix, you know, whatever it is, that's the bit that I enjoy. That's where I can find that excitement. And I think when you first up, those tiny bits of excitement and joy are the bits that see you through the hardest part of it all.
Yes. And I guess for some people, they're like, oh, well, I don't really, you know, I haven't got the time to do it. And that's fair enough. But then if you feel totally miserable about your situation, I would then probably say, well, something needs to change. And you probably can find some time. Or it's like, you know, sometimes, do I want to just sit on the sofa? Well, I do just sit on the sofa and watch Netflix. But there's other times where I will go and do my Bloody Mary delivery. You know, I'll put the kids to bed and I'll be like, oh, do I really want to go out of the rain to deliver one bottle of Bloody Mary mix to a place 20 minutes up the road? But then you're like, well, actually, no, because that gets me closer to something else which I want to do. And there will be a time, if it keeps growing, that I'm not the person doing a delivery up the road. Do you see what I mean? Like, that will be a reality of it. So it's kind of like, if I want that nicer thing, am I happy to sort of sacrifice probably a little bit of comfort to then go and do that thing? And I think that's probably purpose, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's like finding that thing, even though your friend might be like, why are you doing that? Well, probably your partner would be like, why are you doing that? And you're like, well, because, you know, but you've got that inner thing, haven't you?
Yeah. And again, though, that's so important. And that I heard someone say, I think it was on another podcast at some point, if you're sitting watching Netflix, you have time to do something else. And that is crucial. And I often think about that as I sit on the sofa, being a sofa warrior, as I like to call it, of an evening, going, God, my life's shit. I haven't got any money. I can't do anything. What are we doing? Oh, hang on. Sorry. We'll just watch like 5 episodes of this series that we're watching. But, and in your example, you're off delivering. Now, that might only be a few pounds here and there. But actually, sat watching Netflix, you're doing nothing. Or you're out doing something which you may not want to do, but you're earning money. And again, I think that's the bit that people have to change their mindset to understand. If you are really that unhappy, really that miserable, then you'll do anything. And it comes down to that, somewhat cliched adage really, that we all have the same 24 hours. And look what you do with it. And I'm not suggesting 5 a.m. warriors, see quite a lot of it on LinkedIn. I've tried that. I thought, I'm going to get up at 5.
Yeah.
Well, no. I'm not a late riser, don't get me wrong. But, when I've tried 5 a.m., by 10, I need a Bloody Mary and brunch. It's that kind of...
I'm often...
That's the reality.
But not out of choice. A child or a dog is
Yeah. Well, of course, there is always that, dog, children. And then, of course, I do stay up because I'm one of those people that when my brain wakes up, then I'm awake and I'm like, let's get on with the day. By 11 o'clock, I'm like, oh, God, you have to work when you fit, when your energies are at their highest, I guess.
Yeah, I think this quite a nice idea, but I'm not going to advocate 5 a.m. but there is this nice idea of waking up 1 hour earlier and using that as that time for your side thing. Or so it might be like, well, I've always fancied writing a newsletter or blogging a little bit or whatever it might be, or that's when I'm going to do some drawing. And it's like, so could you get up 1 hour earlier? You probably could. And then might that lead to something that's, that starts to really, sort of excites you. And also, I guess this thing of like, you don't have to monetize everything. It might just be something you just really enjoy, but that then gives you more contentment that might make your day-to-day work better, or in another period of time sets the conditions you didn't realize to then do something else, or look at the world another way, or you then met someone through doing this side hustle you started, and they're like, hey, I really, we get on, I really fancy doing this, networking event for people who don't like networking. Like, oh yeah, okay, let's do it. Do you see what I mean? So these things can happen, but they only happen because you did something. And I guess that's it. It's like changing I've become very recently, or very conscious of it, is this idea of like different inputs, so different inputs, and then you're going to get different outcomes, basically. So yes, if we're always watching Netflix, of which we both do quite a lot, but if you don't find another way of some of the time mixing it up and finding fresh things in, you won't get that fresh thought process, basically. And I think that also goes back to what you were saying about LinkedIn. You're scrolling through and it feels like everyone's doing the same thing, and it also can feel a bit intimidating because you're like, oh yeah, they are all doing that, but they all seem to be doing that better than me. Is there an argument therefore of not trying to do exactly as they are because that doesn't quite fit? So like, you're doing a podcast, right, which is like an amazing thing. You're already doing more interesting things than most people. Now there's another way of like, oh, there's lots of podcasts, but you're the only one doing your one, and I suspect in your little social circle you are probably the only person in your circle doing one, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting point, because I think that brings up lots of I want to talk about mindset and all of that, because I think that what we've talked about really comes around to that quite nice. The world is a big place as well. And you're right, I am pretty much the only one of my friends doing a podcast, and they all roll their eyes at me. They're like, oh, seeing you on social media again. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't use Facebook. I post on Facebook for business, but I don't go on Facebook. And even my wife will be like, oh, have you seen such and such? I'm like, I don't care. And yet all my friends will say to me, oh, God, I've had to block you because all I see is your face. I'm like, that's cool. That means you're seeing me, so I'll take it. And I think when we see, the snapshot of what we see on social media, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever that platform happens to be, is tiny. And then it is so hard to escape that. And I see why people get caught up in it, because you are only looking in that box. And sometimes you have to really branch out and find someone different who is doing what you like, if that's what you want to emulate, or be your own authentic self. What advice would you give to people listening about being as authentic as we can in a world where AI and profiles of other people are so influential on what we do?
Well, they're really interesting. I think it's probably that determination of not wanting to be overly influent and feeling a bit more individual. So like, obviously use AI, like lots and lots of people use AI, but then you kind of realize you start to spot it. And again, you start to sound like everyone else. And so it's like, and of course everyone's telling you, oh, it's so much faster, it's so much quicker, you should just use it. But then you're like, but it doesn't sound like me. It doesn't even sound like most humans. And there's all these weird phrases which sort of no one ever used before. And something like they're all coming in like, and everyone's having messy middles. And I was like, well, I'm not wearing all these messy middles. Where the hell have they all never. Who was having a messy middle before ChatGPT told everyone they were having a messy middle?
All I will say is go and look at my post from this morning about that very, very thing. There is a group of phrases and language that I think comes from AI that is just, is telltale. And nobody speaks like it. That's the reality for me, is that nobody speaks the way it produces stuff.
Yeah, and
Sorry,
so it becomes a bit hollow, right? And then you're like, well, if I don't, I don't want to have this hollowness. So the more I'd say at first, like, wow, it's amazing, and then you realize, and like, well, it all feels a bit hollow. So it's trying to find those connections, and I guess, so to be the authentic thing, I think is like also trying to be more like you are in person, or like more like, so if you went for a coffee with someone, would you try and have an interesting time? Would you went on a podcast? Would you try and have it? And some of it's performative, and you might be a little bit sort of knackered after it. But there's an excitement in the performance, right? And of like, got out, we did this thing, and there was energy, and actually got some ideas. I feel better about myself. And then it's like, well, if you notice you feel better about yourself, maybe you want to repeat that. Can you put into play things that might allow that to happen more often? And then I think there's also this thing I say, like, I could log onto my LinkedIn now, scroll around for about 10 minutes, and actually I might feel a bit like, oh God, like there's so many brilliant people doing amazing things. You're like, oh man. But I think the more you're conscious of like, that's their race, right? And they're doing that bit, or they're further ahead, or they tackle it from a different way. And so it's trying to boil it down to like your own context and like, where are you right now? Easy to say, not always easy to do. But I think if you're consistently trying to be like, well, actually, this is my little spot, and I can, I might have that as an ambition to be into that space, but I've got to remember that actually nearly always they started way before you. Like I don't know, what have I just clocked onto? 8,000 LinkedIn followers, right? Which I started on, I started taking it seriously. I was on 2,500. And so now someone might be like, oh, you've got 8,000 followers. That's quite a lot. But it's taken me 2 years of like grinding away on it on a daily basis to get there. But no one would see that 2 years, and they might be like, well, he's got 8,000 followers, like whatever. But it's only because I took the steps and the conscious decision to work on it, and I basically do it every single day. And that's why I've got the end result. And knowing that and teaching myself that has been a really interesting thing. And then along the way, I've learned a couple of other things. So all in the same vein, right? Which is, I wanted to transition a little bit more away from just straight email marketing to more one-to-one, like hands-on, not coaching, but kind of like helping people hit their goals. A little bit of coaching, but more kind of like mentoring along the way. Anyway, so it's like, well, I don't have any clients and I don't have any track record of that, so how am I going to do about it? So I just took the challenge of like, I'm going to talk about it every day for 90 days. And I think someone mercifully took me up on my offer at about day 47 or something. So I was like, I don't have to do all 90 days. Although I think I carried on for like 60 days just to kind of like complete it.
Do it, yeah.
Yeah, but well, because I was like, I'll do it up to Christmas then, because I've kind of made this commitment to myself. But I was very relieved that I didn't have to go the full 90. But because it can be quite hard to do. But that's the thing, right? So I guess the things you want aren't necessarily that easy. And maybe you have to work a bit harder and understand that you've probably got to be a little bit uncomfortable. So it's more comfortable to watch Netflix. It's less comfortable to start a podcast. It's less comfortable to write something. It's even less comfortable to, do a post on Instagram. Do you see what I mean? But these things, it's like, can you break out a little bit? And I think and the more conscious you are about that, but then the more you spot how it makes you feel, hopefully, yes, I'm comfortable, did it. Oh, I feel pretty good, actually. Nothing bad happened. What a surprise. And I think once you started to get into that, then you're in a much better space. So how about yourself?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that comfort or discomfort actually is probably super critical to being able to grow and be authentic. I set out last year to post on social media a video every day. no longer than a minute, something about the work I do. I help healthcare professionals exit jobs and start their own businesses. That's what I've done. I've got a lot of experience. I'm not a coach. I don't have any coaching experience. I just have 25 years of solid experience of changing jobs and actually realizing that I wasn't particularly happy. Actually, that's the truth of it, because I just wasn't really me. I was chasing money. I was chasing promotion. I thought I was going to run the NHS. I thought I was going to run the world. I was a very naive, arrogant young man. And then you get that smack in the face and you go, oh yeah, oh, get a grip. So I set myself that target. And what was interesting, and you're right, it's those small, like your 90 days, it's those small steps that you have to do. So I literally have posted every day something, clip from podcasts or just me talking to camera. I've done the odd funny dog video because clearly my dog is a
For the algorithm.
funny boy sometimes, and it all helps. And then sometimes it hits and sometimes it doesn't. But I think the key in that uncomfortable bit is understanding that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And you have to push through that to get through. And then you said someone came to you kind of day 45, so you only went to 60 instead of 90. But you have to put that effort in. And when you look at all these other people, and I'll flick through Instagram and I'll say, oh my God, they've got like 19,000 followers. I've got 190 something after my slogging my guts out. But the reality is, I'm not particularly interesting. I'm very niche. I'm not funny. I'm not particularly attractive, but I'm doing what I want to do and I enjoy it. And that's a conversation I have with my son quite a lot, because he's on TikTok and he plays his guitar and he does things. He says, oh, Dad, look, I've got this, I've got that. So, how many followers have you got? So we have a bit of a follower off, and I think he's probably winning. 13-year-old playing guitar is much more interesting than I am. But it's about that quality. And this is a bit that I think gets lost with my son, but also many people. 8,000 followers on LinkedIn, I think, is fantastic. I've talked about it quite a bit. I've just hit over 3,000, and that's been quite a milestone. But like yourself, that's a year of really plugging at it. And the last 500 of those are probably very genuine, meaningful connections, not just random clicking here and there. And I think that's the key. And that's the difference is, what are those connections actually doing for you? I could have 100,000 followers on Instagram and not a single person ever purchase any of my services.
Yeah. I think
they might like my videos, but get nothing from it.
I fully agree with all of that. And I think also, as a way of trying to like keep yourself going along the way, is if you were in a room with like 100 people listening to what you had to say, you'd be like, oh my God, you'd feel you'd be like, that was amazing. 100 people came to see me talk about, and I know followers isn't quite the same thing, but it's a really good way of rationalizing, like, as you're growing, that is an amazing thing. And like, so if you were in a room with like 3,000 people, you'd be like, holy moly, this is incredible.
Yeah,
I'm a pretty big deal. But it's only because some other people are on these other massive levels. But as you said, they're often not playing in the same field, or they're in this weird thing of like, coaches and coach, and it's sort of a weird pyramid thing of, and it's like a weird, like hollow, doesn't actually don't really do anything, but do lots, but don't do anything. It's kind of a strange ecosystem, isn't it? But they tend to have a lot of
it's really funny to look at it and try and understand and pick through some of it. But actually, I think the more followers you get within a range, I'm talking, 8,000 down, really. So once you get beyond that, you're probably doing something right, and there's there is money attracted to that if that's the way you want to look at it. But I look at it and think, I've got 3,000 people, you've got 8,000 people. I want to be me. I want to speak to those people as if I was speaking to them in the room. And I see LinkedIn and other platforms actually as very much as real life, as if we were sat in the same room, because that is who I am. I don't want to be someone different. And actually, I posted about it earlier in the week, because I think a lot of people put on this front, and it's to do with language, it's to do with all sorts of things. But when you meet me in person or see me online, I want that to be the same. I think it's so important to be as authentic and genuine as you can be, and inject some of that into it when you're trying to grow, whatever it happens to be.
This is Cassie, where all the world's billboards are just a few clicks away. Find your favorites on a map, add them to your campaign, and off you go. So whether you're a small business or large enterprise, if your brand has grand aspirations, take it beyond the feed and onto the streets with Cassie.
Substack's a bit of a new one on me, and I think we touched on it briefly. And you talked about a side project.
Yes, actually, I just
tell me a little bit more.
I just got a WhatsApp from my sounds very grand co-founder. we're just going to plan our first event. And anyway, so we've had an email about that. So that feels like progress already. But, it's like, it started off actually this very thing. This is how, met someone. I had a bit of an idea and I was like, my Substack following's really small. Wouldn't it be cool if we could inspire more people to start doing their Substack basically? Because it's very American. More and more English people are coming onto it, but it's, it's very American. So it's kind of like, can we encourage more people? And also, it's more fun if more people are engaging in the platform. So it's like, why don't do that? So originally we were having a coffee just to sort of talk about how we could encourage some people. We were going to do like just a meetup, like coffee for other people with Substacks in Brighton. And then we had our coffee, and then by the end of it, we're like, oh my God, we're going to do these other things as well. So that's how this thing came about, which was like a reason why lots of people don't write on Substack. It's really hard to grow an audience on there. And so you might write something really, really good, but unless you somehow, you got to assume you're not going to go viral, you're going to probably get like 100 views on your post at tops, maybe 30 views. Do you see what I mean? And maybe that's two of you coming from a different browser. So, like, oh, right, well, I'm two of those.
And then your mum.
Yeah, and you might say, like, well, if I'm really honest with myself, not that many people have seen this post, but you've put hours into it. You may have spent a whole day writing this thing. And that can therefore mean lots of people quit really, really quickly. Therefore, less people are engaging on it. And you're like, well, it's less of a great platform if less people are engaging on it. So that was kind of our thinking. So it's like, well, if we have basically a shared one, so you can, submit your article and through this incredibly hard vetting process of sounds good. We'll put it on there basically. And you can see how that over time that's going to grow to a bigger audience because you've got people inputting lots of interesting things. They'll support it because they had their, they'll be like, oh, check it out. I put my post onto a side project, so you can see how this thing, we're sitting there going, wow, this is really nice. And then we're like, well, let's plug in let's keep that same idea of like meetups and then try to inspire people. And then it meandered more from like Substack into just like this general idea of creativity, starting things, giving people the nudge to go for it. And that's how it's come. So it feels like all the conversations I all have. And that's why everything I do on its own doesn't work, but you put them all together and they all try to feed off each other, all kind of make sense. And this is another one of those. So that feels like a nice space to be in. And hopefully, it'll be a place to inspire people. And that feels like what a lovely thing to have in your life. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, log onto this platform and people do cool things.
Do you think people worry about having different pockets of expertise or different avenues to follow when actually they are all linked, but sometimes they can just feel a little bit disjointed?
I think people are really worried about it. I mean, you must find this as well, this idea, because you're encouraging people to either fully quit or just start to dip their toe and like see what another world might look like. But people are terrified about it, or that, the classic is, well, I'll start that when I'm ready, or like, I just need to do that job for another 2 years and then I think I'll be ready, but almost definitely won't be, or you're sucked in further 2 years, or you've lost even more energy and spirit for another 2 years. And then you're like, well, I did another 2 years, so I guess I'll just crack on now, and like, wow, so you resigned yourself to like, you're signing up to, I sometimes say, misery prison.
Yeah, true.
And you're like, well, that doesn't need to be the case. And so I think there's a real thing around that whole world of like, don't be afraid of it. And actually, I bet you'll enjoy it way more if you just go for it. But people are terribly worried about that. And in the same way, you'll have something. So you might put something on LinkedIn, right? And then someone will go, I love your LinkedIn post. You've never clicked like. But I think people are worried about clicking like because obviously it's visible and you've therefore signaled to the world that you like this piece of content. People are terribly worried about that. Like, oh no, I don't want people knowing that I like David's content. He puts the bloody videos up every day.
That's interesting because you hit on a really a fascinating point there about the people that I work with. I obviously do. I take people from healthcare and start their own business, be it on the side or fully quit. And they've usually got to a point where they are so sick and tired. And it really is, and I should probably change my language. I don't take people from the NHS. Let's just clarify this. I'm not there dragging people away from a system that's already drowning. I'm talking to people who have reached a point where they can no longer function in the capacity that they once were. Classic example, doctor said to me, I can no longer be a GP in the 10 minutes that I have to speak to my patients. How can I do the one thing I'm trained to do in such a short amount of time? People don't want to speak about that. People don't want to shout. So I have no doubt there are people who see the posts that I put out there and absolutely, as you point out, don't click like, because if someone sees that, Doris has just clicked like on a post that talks about leaving a job, and I think that is blanket across corporate, across healthcare, every sector, there is that fear that someone will then see that and think, oh, well, hang on, they want to leave. Right, let's, target them. So I think that fear is real. And I think that speaks to a wider and deeper fear about being so worried of what others do and think of us instead of just being us and being that kind of authentic self and wanting to help as many people as possible. Is that across multiple sectors? Is that just within hospitality, food and drink? What's the bigger plan there?
I guess the interesting one is for the side project one, it's my first sort of breakout of the food and drink. So that in itself feels a bit exciting because there's always sort of constraints where like, oh, I would like to sort of do something around that, but I can't because it's not right. It's not my world. And so it's giving yourself permission, right? Or again, it's setting conditions. It's definitely been part of me over the last year or so where like, well, I'd like to go and do that or talk to that person, but it doesn't quite fit. So it's kind of like trying to find a vehicle that allows you to express that side or go and have broader conversations. And I think that's probably the other thing, right? It's that same thing of like where you are today doesn't mean where you are tomorrow, right? And you might, at that very moment, you feel like I can't get to that point, but you can start making some steps to it in the same way. I say I started off just really focusing on email marketing, then I sort of added in some Shopify stuff and some customer survey type stuff, research, and then meandered all the way to like becoming actually much more of a sort of mentoring zone for like founders and sort of overstretched marketeers. So, you can see like it doesn't have to be what you set up or what you start isn't where you need to end up. And also for your own self, I'm a big believer in this these days, which is how you feel now. Well, you won't be the same person next year, so everything isn't the same anyway. Nothing's going to stand still. You just won't be the same person. It just won't happen. There'll be bits of you, but, or the world around you will change. Or sometimes like, oh, it's because the kids are like this, but your kids will change in that year. And so you might be like, oh, they're always at clubs, but actually next year they might not want to go to so many clubs. And suddenly you're like, oh, I've got way more free time than I thought I had because I'm not following everyone for things, Yeah, you would.
I wanted to touch on children. So I wanted to ask you, how are you imparting the knowledge that you have onto your children? Because I think that careers is a huge chunk of what we do and how we share that. Because I think that careers in 5-10 years time will be massively different to where they are now. I said before we started recording, I was at St. John's last week talking to year 8. They asked me to go and speak about careers, what the future of careers might look like. And I'm a bit of a curveball with that. And I was at local grammar school yesterday, again, kind of throwing my 10 pence in amongst the accountants and the military and the healthcare workers. Because I'm like, actually, your CVs, yeah, great. But actually, that's not the way things are going to be. Your grades don't really mean loads. I know they do right here, right now. My daughter's about to do GCSEs. I'm not saying they're not important, but the focus is going to shift. And that traditional path of school, higher education, university, work, higher work, promotion, retirement, death is going to change.
Yeah,
I see that portfolio career being much more of a thing for our children. So just interested to know, how do you deal with those situations with your children?
Well, I mean, I should caveat, I'm not a great parent, and I wouldn't come to me for parenting advice. If you want to see someone just
We all have those moments.
just about hanging on, vaguely holding it together, then if you want to feel better about your own parenting, come and watch mine. Would be my watchword. You think actually I'm pretty good in comparison to that would be my side.
Well, we could probably have a whole episode about parenting if you wanted, how bad we are at it.
If you want to see, someone take their kid to a cafe and buy them the brownie, which they said only moments before they couldn't have, then I'm your man.
Guilty.
And also I would say that my kids have got, like a sourdough habit that I have to feed on a daily basis, which, again, how do we end up in that place? But I think I totally agree with you. So and I never they're still pretty young, so we're not into the full academic side of it, but it's ramping up. But I never thought that I wouldn't be worried about their results, or do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not. It's, obviously I want them to do their thing, but actually I'm not worried about that. And I, again, never really thought that results wouldn't be important, like exam results and stuff. Well, there's always been part of you like, actually, I'm not so big. I didn't really do university. You'd struggle to find any official record of me going to UE, but I floated around there for a little bit for a few months. But so I know that you don't have to do university to do your thing. I know that for certain. Anyway, so I guess I'm very relaxed about it because I don't think it's very important anymore. And I think actually it's much more important to try and be happy and fulfilled in different ways. And yes, the portfolio thing's definitely coming because all of the knowledge exists, like the curriculum was always behind. And now just think how ridiculously behind it is because it's kind of crazy, right? And yes, you might have to do some reading between the lines of ChatGPT, but in effect, anything you want to know is a few taps of your keyboard away. Or you don't even have to bloody tap anymore, do you? You can just talk to it, and the information's there, but whether it be, even if you went more old school and you went Wikipedia, and yes, there'll always be inaccuracies or whatever, and yes, there are biases, but, if you went through your school textbooks and you went, when you took your biased approach to it, I'd rather suspect you'd find some very biased views in there. And actually, it'd be really interesting now to look at these textbooks that we went through. And I think
absolutely.
Our eyes would probably sort of boggle at some of the stuff we were being told or asked to be told or whatever. So, anyway, so I think it's more about the skills and it's more about connections. And ultimately, this portfolio thing, I think, is the way that the world's going to go, because some of this heavy lifting in life is, there's no point pretending I don't like AI. There's absolutely no point. It's happening. And so is all the robot stuff and how that translates and to what extent. But, this fundamental shift has been forced upon us. Most of us are like head in the sand, just ignoring it. I think some of us got like half an hour and going, blimey, that's a bit much. And I think that's also why people are retreating back to like human connections and wanting to sort of come together. And also, you have this massive increase in people buying, like adults buying Labubus and whatever, it's jellyfish or whatever. Because it's comforting and it's coming back and it's like trying to be like, whoa, what's happening here? All these things. And so I think it's just trying to like not overly stress it and be more versatile. And that's quite scary for lots of people because, we've all been brought up on this system of it's got to be like this and this is what you do. And this idea there's a rule book and and there's a way to do it. And actually there isn't. And so I think that's going to be the new rule book. It's going to be forced upon us. There are no rules and you can do more stuff. And I've also, I don't know enough about it, but I'm kind of a believer in this idea of like lots of us going to be on this universal income. And then you can choose to earn more money by doing side projects and so on. But I do think there's a world where, we will be on this universal income because so many, the structure of jobs is going to be taken away more and more.
Change.
It doesn't mean we won't work.
Yeah.
And just to the same point, banging on, you've got me on a subject now. But, interestingly, people are now advertising for copywriters. Be like, well, how come? Because everyone's using ChatGPT. But because you then miss the humanness and the individuality and how do you stand out? It's by having a point of view. And I think if we can encourage more people to have a point of view, to be different, to act differently, that's actually really exciting. So in a way, we're sort of could be getting to a real renaissance of creativity as the
agreed
antidote to everyone having access to the same tools.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you said there. And again, I was at the local grammar school here yesterday, and one of the chaps is clearly a very talented musician. And he said, but I'm not really sure that's what I want to pursue because, AI is going to take it over. AI will actually get rid of all the music. And we just talked it through. And I said, actually, hang on a second. You're right. There'll be little bits, there'll be low-hanging fruit that'll take adverts and things like that. But if you can play an instrument, 20 years down the line, if that has started to disappear, you are going to stand out in a group. And suddenly when your friends get mad, they're going to go, whoa, we've got a live musician. Can you imagine? What? And that's the sort of human interaction that I don't think will ever be replaced because you can't replicate going to a gig. There is something about that. And I think that's the bit that people miss. And it's the same with writing is yes, you can write reams of stuff, but actually that genuine human touch is so different. And I am super passionate about it with the kids because I think we cannot fathom what will happen and they cannot fathom what will happen. Can you imagine the world we live in now at St. John's when we were there, when you were there, when I was there, the fact that the textbooks might be slightly biased towards, World War II was whatever it was, that you would not be going to university, that you were not going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. It's changing. And I think people need to realize that. And our generation is struggling with that because we are getting to the age where we should have 20, 30 years of work left. People don't want to be doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's scary as well because, am I going to get off this call and vibe code a new app? No, I don't know what I'm doing.
But you could.
But you could. And I think, but that's the amazing thing, right? And that's where it is incredible. The barriers to entry to do something are, like never know. So yes, we've just started a new thing, God, I can't remember what it's called, side project, right? So we've just started that, and that's just a coffee, and then a couple of like, oh, should we do it then? And we've logged onto Substack and launched it. That's that never happened before. In the old days, I guess what we had to do, we made a magazine, and then so people could enter into the magazine. But you then have all these publishing costs, and it would have been very cost prohibitive. Instead, totally free, just your time. You can. There's all these people. There's a reason why social media. Lots of people have started, businesses just from their phone. You could be a social media manager with your phone and work for some incredible companies just all through hitting some buttons on your phone. And amazing that you can start selling something, now TikTok shop, live shopping, there's all these opportunities, and that's like amazing. And so it's kind of like, are you encouraging, your kids to be nimble enough to think about those and not be overly stressed about being sort of defined by what other people want you to be, and also not. And I guess in the old days, again, same system, we'd be a bit suspicious of like, oh, they're changing, or they've changed their mind. But they put so much effort into that. I'm really disappointed doing that. Where now you're kind of like, actually, they should try loads and loads of things because it makes sense.
Absolutely. And that versatility, I think, will be key for them as they move forward. And quite honestly, it gets harder and harder for me as a parent to justify why they're learning certain things. I think kids have always asked, oh, what use is that? But actually, it gets harder and harder to justify
answer that.
As time goes on. I really, really struggle. Ben, thank you. It's been another fascinating conversation about all sorts of things. But really, I think more than anything, the mindset that we have as business owners, as people who are working on different projects all over the place. Is there anything else that we should talk about that we haven't covered?
Well, I mean, I think it's just that sense of joy. Like, what do you think is going to give you fuel and give you excitement? And I think that's, that, and then use that lens to then make your decisions. And also like, it's easy to say no to things, isn't it? So just as a very small example, just to sort of finish off, and it's nicely coined, but someone DM'd me and invited me to a sort of supper club thing, and it was in London. I was like, that means I'm going to get home pretty late. Do I need that? Blah blah blah. But I was like, there's something about the way the person asked me, and I was like, oh, I'm really going to go for it. And then it was called Yes Club, and you're like, there's the world telling you to say yes to Yes Club. So I said yes to it. Of course, it was, really pleased I did it. It was a great room of people. And actually, interesting, it was my first, they took your phone away. I was like, oh my God. So I think I only went to sort of grab my phone about 57 times during the course of dinner. But it was a really lovely thing to do and a real experience. And I just really, so saying yes to things, which may lead to things, and I'm not one for going, we talked about it before about being uncomfortable. I'm not one for being so uncomfortable, the degrees of discomfort and the challenge. And I think also, people love to say, I've got this big, hairy, audacious goal, but I just feel like I'm a bit suspicious of those because I feel like you're more like to fail, and then that feels a bit rubbish, and then that's going to beat yourself down. So I think make your life a bit easier, right? And focus on like, do you think it's going to interest you, give you a bit of fuel? And also, do you think it's challenging enough, but not so challenging you'll never get there? So it's like a smaller incremental, and you build up your confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's fantastic. We are only ever one conversation away, really, from the next amazing thing to happen to us if you say yes and take the opportunity.
Well, like saying yes to this podcast.
And thank you so much for saying yes to this podcast, Ben. It's been an absolute pleasure. I wish you all the very best with everything that you're doing.
Well, thank you.
And side projects. I will check it out. And please, do share those links, and I will make sure that everybody comes and follows you and buys Bloody Mary from you.
Oh, you're a wonderful man. All right, well, I'm going to go and find you some new guests for your podcast as well.
Amazing. Ben, thank you ever so much. Have a super day.
All right, take care. Cheers now. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.